morning, Mr. Mayor, Madam Chairwoman, members of the council. My name is Ellen Smith. I'm here with our senior commercial manager, Mr. Leroy Lewis. And we're here to address you today about possibly placing an item on your council agenda to address dumpster overflow and the nuisance it creates, and this program to fix it. And that's about perfect timing. Because this is probably the last pretty picture you'll see. This is about commercial dumpster overflow. And the fact there's really little incentive to keep your garbage in your dumpster under the current regulations. From our best practices, value-added service section, we have a program called CLEAN, which provides great incentives to prevent what you see in this photo. Dumpster overflow contributes to stormwater runoff issues, unsightly litter and odor, certainly bad aesthetics for a tourist community. Unbalanced costs, cost burden across the community, lost recycling opportunities, illegal dumping, safety concerns for our residents, pests and other vermin. And those are photos of how dumpster overflow affects you all. I want to show you two photos of how it sort of affects our employees from a safety perspective. And my question usually is, how would you like to be that guy trying to pick up this overloaded dumpster? So our best practices section brings forward a CLEAN program which costs the city nothing. It's actually revenue positive for the city, and Waste Management has invested the technology to provide evidence and a program to prevent these situations. And it's called a CLEAN program. But I want to start with, and it's a very brief presentation, basics about the bin. Customers only pay for what's in the cube of the dumpster. All the garbage that's put on top or next to is thrown away for free. So that is also a problem with the current system and inequity, because people should pay for what they throw away, and that's the foundation of your garbage system. We come to you today to ask for your assistance, because we've been taking pictures like we've shown you and left for you for years now in Riviera Beach. We've been calling the customers. It takes 5 phone calls to get the right person that can order the increase in, say, a dumpster size or an increased frequency, because that's really the answer here, is to right size the dumpster. If it's the wrong size, it's always going to overflow. And we have found that on average, 10% of the dumpsters are 80% of the problem, because we've been working through this. But there's some reluctant customers, we should say, to right size. I mentioned the CLEAN program is effective without any city staff nor funds and is revenue positive. Currently, customers pay for only what's in the dumpster, and the total cost of removal and disposal should be borne by the generator of the waste. Our agreement sets forth possible terms of our relationship with the customer. Madam Attorney, it's section 7.1 of our agreement that says the size and frequency of the dumpster shall be sufficient to provide no commercial solid waste need to be placed outside the container. That's in our agreement, but there's no teeth to enforce it whatsoever. The current system is very important. The current system is that we take the picture, and if we see a dumpster overage, our driver on the spot will try to call the customer. The decision maker is probably not there. Then we call the code enforcement staff, and we wait, and possibly everybody's tied up doing other things, because it's an on-the-spot sort of necessity to clean the waste that's there. Under this program, the CLEAN program, these photographs are immediately transmitted from the truck that has the camera technology to a third party that verifies the overage. Then a customer will receive the notice of overage in their invoice. And a waste management consultant will contact the customer and say, here's how you avoid this in the future. This is a quote from the city of Satellite Beach, who's very concerned about groundwater pollution in the St. Lucie River, Indian River Lagoon, that says that CLEAN became one of their top priorities. This is sample language from Delray, and a good question is, what other cities have adopted this program? And it's growing every day. Lauderhill Lakes, Parkland, Pasco County, Brevard County, Cocoa Beach, Melbourne, Palm Bay, locally Wellington, Delray, Mangonia Park, and Gulf have all adopted the clean program, and the language that needs to be added to our agreement, since you control what we are allowed to do in the city, is simple, and it's in your agenda packet, in the memos. And it's a short sentence that would be added to section 7.1 of our agreement. I don't need to read it for you, but it essentially says that a dumpster overage will be defined as the lid being displaced 10 inches above the lid of the dumpster being displaced 10 inches. And that would cause an overage. In the event of an overage, a photo will be taken and sent to the resident, and there'll be no amnesty. There will be an overage assigned on their invoice of $200 per overage, up to a maximum of $600. We've learned in this program that there are absentee landlords, and you want to get their attention but not be overly punitive in this program. And at that point, our customer service representatives call the customer and say, was this a one-time thing? And if it is a one-time thing, we tell them how to avoid the charges in the future, which is just call us if you have extra waste. Just call the Public Works Department here, get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to pick it up, and it's far less costly than an overage. Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you a question. You said that 10% of 10% of the customers with the overage is 80% of the problem. That 10%, is that like businesses, residential? What makes up that 10%?
It's businesses.
Businesses.
Right, and you have photographs of some dumpsters at condominiums. This program will not apply at this point to condominiums or residential uses, just to commercial uses. So the language that would be added would describe what a dumpster overage is, lid displaced 10 inches, and describe the process of sending the customer the evidence. And that's what we'd like the dumpsters to look like here in this city, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. The program runs itself. There's no staff required. It's revenue positive, and that 5% of the revenue collected in this is returned to the city. We believe that that is an appropriate fund to achieve some of your cleanup activities that you're seeking annually. The rollout of this program in other cities have required, the city council has required that we notify our customers in advance with 2 letters saying this program is coming. Here's how you'll avoid any situations. And then we maybe even do a 1-month soft rollout where we really don't charge to get their attention. And the next month, the overages will be part of their invoices. And we look for your positive approval to move this forward for your council's consideration.
Madam Chair, in the abundance of transparency, I want to ensure that the modification to the agreement in the event that the council wants to proceed forward in this action would not negate the city going through a competitive solicitation process for solid waste service at the conclusion of the contract. So the modification would be exclusively to implement the clean program. One of the things that we've also had the conversation with Waste Management, and it's contained in the memorandum, is that we would like to utilize the 5% that would be collected associated with this program for the purposes of, in March, rolling out a program that we'd like to do, basically spring cleaning. One of the challenges that has been expressed to me, and I think we've all heard from our residents, is that the cost for bulk pickup on certain items is quite expensive. And so we want to, for the month of March, on Saturdays, allow for residents to work with the council members to have volunteers assist in putting items out on the curb. And if you put an item out on the curb, we'll pick it up. And there will be no cost associated with the pickup. That will assist us in addressing some of the code compliance concerns that we have, and we think will make a significant improvement in the quality of life in our community, but also addressing some of the biggest challenges, because I think it boils down to some of our senior citizens not being able to have folks assist them in moving the trash to the front, or the debris to the front, and then ultimately the cost associated with a special pickup or a bulk pickup, depending on the size, is quite large. This is something that we want to do on an annual basis. One of the things that was not communicated as part of the presentation, and if the folks from Waste Management can speak on it, is that as the program sits now, it then transitions the responsibility to code compliance. And so instead of having a situation where waste management takes on the responsibility of correcting the issue and working directly with the client, now we have a situation where code compliance is involved, and now you have additional staff resources and time that is expended to cure the issues that one or a small number of your commercial customers or your roll-off customers or your container customers have throughout the city. And so if you can speak to the process as it stands now, and then basically it would be abrogating the city of that responsibility with a revenue positive element associated with that, and then the community cleanup program that Director Bailey and I have spoken with you about.
The existing program is cumbersome and staff intensive and ineffective, and I don't use that word lightly. Our driver approaches a dumpster that's overloaded. And I think that's Q. Is that Q in the picture? I think it is. He has to do something. He can either haul it or call it. And haul it means he has to physically remove all the bags on top of that, somehow get them into, you put them aside, then he uses the forks on the truck to empty the dumpster, then he reloads the material and empties again. In that situation, this customer is throwing material away for free, robbing the city of the funds, making our employees work much harder than we agreed to in our contract. And we really don't have the teeth in the existing agreement to do much about it. And if we decide not to haul it, but to call it, then we call the customer and code enforcement, and we stand around and wait for everybody to show up. And usually they don't. Because the customer is not really, first it's early in the morning, and the decision maker's probably not there, and that's the decision makers who's going to pay for the removal here. And that's the question. So that, we wait for code enforcement, they have to stop what they're doing and immediately come over, and you see this is not infrequent, it happens all the time. I hope that answered your question, Mr. City Manager. This clean program will have 0 staff time for code enforcement. It's automatic. We've invested in the technology to take the pictures, do the invoicing, send it to the customer, have the call center in place to get the phone calls with the questions that do come in. And I can testify here that living through the implementation of this in Wellington and Delray, it went virtually seamlessly. People understand they should be responsible for the waste they throw away. And occasionally we hear, well, that's not my garbage. Well, that's where the pictures come in. When we see the mailing labels on the garbage, on the boxes, we can tell whose it is. Our guys are pretty good at telling that. If somebody says, well, there's illegal dumping going on here and that's not my garbage, we'll get a lock. It costs $9 one time to get a lock from us, and forever you'll solve that problem. I hope that addressed your question, Mr. City Manager.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
And this program costs the city nothing?
Costs the city nothing and returns 5% of the revenue collected.
Mike.
Costs the city nothing and returns
He's good. Just keep talking, yeah.
5% of the revenue collected.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
so are we talking both commercial and residential?
No, sir, just commercial. At this point, just commercial. This program can be extended to the condominiums, but that we've not had that conversation, and that has not yet been done in my experience in the Palm Beach County market, extending it to commercial. You see some pictures in your, I hope I don't want to talk over your thought here, but you can see some pictures in what I left you that are some of our chronic residential developments that have dumpsters that are overflowing. We're not sure this is the answer for that. It could be a physical limitation on site that they have, such as Sonoma Bay. They have nowhere else to put it. So in answer to your question, it's just commercial.
How many accounts do you, if you had to estimate?
900. 900 commercial accounts. I'm really ballparking that out in the city of Riviera Beach.
So I'm looking at the ordinance. It says, well, the proposed language for the ordinance, and I seen shall charge the customer $200, not to exceed $600 per month. What determines, that amount, like the 200 versus the 600?
That's an excellent question, and the subject of much discussion among in many cities. That the $200 comes from a table that's in your fee schedule of how much you pay for a dumpster. It's not very complicated. It's how big is your dumpster and how many times do we pick it up? And we need to provide an incentive for somebody. We can't make the overage so inexpensive they'd rather just pay it. So based on the cost to rent a dumpster, that goes from the smallest dumpster in the city, you don't have any 1-yarders, you don't have any yard and halves, you have a 2-yarder. It's $131 a month for the smallest possible dumpster in the city going 1 time a week. Now the largest possible dumpster in the city going 7 times a week, such as a very busy restaurant, is almost $3,000 a month. So the overage charge had to be meaningful. And we found that $200 was meaningful. The $600 limit, Mr. Councilman, is for the absentee landlords. Some cities have put it up to $800 limit per month that they could receive an overage. That's up to you. It's absolutely up to the council's discretion how to set the fine, and how to set a limit on possible overages for the month. But some of the national chains we find are some of the worst offenders because they really don't know your local ordinances.
Oh yeah. I actually experienced that. Where's our code person? Family Dollar. Oh my goodness. I wasn't even on the board, and I used to come out of TD Bank, and I used to wonder what the heck were they doing at Family Dollar on Congress, to the point as a citizen, I called down to the corporate office. I said, this is not cool. It's not acceptable to have all of this trash outside the dumpster. I wouldn't mind seeing somebody like that being penalized and hit hard, because it's just like, it was right next to a neighborhood, and it just was the most disgusting thing. I mean, it was so much trash, you didn't even know it was a dumpster there at that point. And I physically spoken to the, district manager, and because they're so far away, they don't really have the ability to know what's going on. But I think something certainly has to happen, and ultimately they did get it corrected. But you know, they become eyesores, and you don't want to be the property that's adjacent to it, because now you have rodents on your property, and it's just never ending. So
We worked with Family Dollar directly and repeatedly asked them, please make your dumpster bigger. You need a bigger dumpster in it. And finally, maybe through you and for our efforts, they did increase the size of the dumpster, right, Leroy, at Family Dollar here?
Okay, so if we implement something like this, you know, I think it's important for us to know who those 900 accounts are as a city, from our BTR standpoint and from our code standpoint, because, you know, quite honestly, if you take a $200 penalty, you're looking at giving us $10 back. That doesn't, you know, I'm not, you know, again, I'm not doing this as a way to generate money for the city, but I would hope that it encourages everyone to kind of, you know, be a little more conscientious about how they, you know, dump their trash and how our community looks. However, from the code perspective, I would hope that there's an opportunity that, you know, when we establish some teeth, that if we have to continue to go after these repeat actors, that they're penalized, and that it costs us staff time and even to hire an attorney to even oversee code compliance hearings, that, you know, you hit them on your end, and then, you know, they have to come before the code enforcement magistrate, because I think it's a, you know, it's a double-sided thing. We understand the amount of work on your side, but certainly I want to make sure that, you know, I'm not in it for $10. I don't want to see us make, I mean, even at best, we're talking about the most we would benefit off of this as a $600 penalty is $30. That doesn't do much as far as why I would want to support it. I would want to support it because it will kind of be in tandem to what our code enforcement department is doing. So that's my only concern about it. But first of all, you know, I want to make sure that these individuals have some sort of mechanism or are aware that you have the responsibility to ensure that there's no illegal dumping on your property or on your can by using a lock and securing your containers, because, you know, I actually see people dump all the time in dumpsters that don't belong to them, and sometimes it's after hours, and it's usually, you know, bad actors, and, you know, those people come and go. But that goes to the point of us even having more feet on the ground as far as code compliances, or even perhaps even training police officers to recognize when you see a U-Haul truck dumping a bunch of trash inside of a dumpster that is at a business after hours, that something's not right about that. So, I think that's something that should be also considered as far as operationally how we address those things, because when the property owner comes back on Monday, their dumpster was just picked up on Friday. Now the dumpster's full on Monday. So I think there's a few different components that we have to kind of include and keep in mind when we talk about this implementing this new code.
All right, any other comments or questions
I
about
wanted
it?
to ask, I think that, I'm sure that this program could work well, but given your experience in other cities, and I know nothing is 100%, correct, what are some of the issues that you've had implementing this, that how you've corrected it?
Thank you. I think 3 come to mind. One is the illegal dumping. And we've worked with the customers that receive the notices, and we say, can we lock your dumpster? And we tune into we help them. We tune into what's going on there. Our guys on the ground, our route managers who drive constantly, will keep an eye on that facility, and that's one item. 2, physical limitation. There's an exemption in some cities. I don't know that it would be applicable in this city, when you just can't fit a bigger dumpster at your facility. An alleyway in Delray Beach that serves a restaurant is a perfect example. There are dumpsters in those alleys. There's infrastructure limits, power poles, parking in the alleys, that they just can't make a bigger dumpster. And these dumpsters are already getting collected 7 days a week. 7 days, so they are at the limit. So we crafted an exemption in Delray for the physical limitations. We've not had that in Wellington. We've not had that necessity in any other city that I know of. In the historic old downtowns with alleyways that service waste, that's where the problem was. And the third is the question about the teeny dumpsters, those 2-yarders. If it's only $131 a month for the dumpster and they get a $200 overage, that raises an equity concern compared to a guy who's got a 4-yarder, and the majority of your dumpsters in this town that are overage are 4- and 6-yarders. So maybe you would like to consider a smaller fine for the smaller 2-yard dumpsters. I will say on that point, because you don't want to hit the small businesses, you have something in your agreement with us that's a little unusual, and you have an ability to have a small commercial generator use a toter. They don't use so a lot of your small businesses use toters like you have at residences, and that's something that you have in your city. So there's not a big impact on that side of the world of the customers. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
So here's what I would ask, and you're probably already doing this, but in the past life, I actually was a truck driver during college for a company called Creative Recycling Systems of North Florida. And a lot of what we did was electronics recycling, because there's a lot of value in there. But all across North Florida, South Georgia, and South Alabama, even sometimes in Mississippi, we used to go out and just do recycling fairs where we allow the community to come out and dispose of televisions. And it's usually done in partnership with a company like yours, Waste Management, recycle oil, recycle paper shredding or something like that. I would love if we're going to be, I guess, a little more regulatory on some of these small businesses, then we provide an opportunity for residents to dispose of items that would clutter the streets, like the people who scrap televisions and they leave the television and they take the copper and it's laying there, and then next thing code enforcement sprays it. But having those kind of events in our city, which really benefits not just the community, it benefits the city, and certainly there's some residual value in some of the items that you recycle. I would love to see that done, if, more likely probably on a quarterly basis, if we can do something like that at a Wells Recreation or inside of a large park where we set up containers where people can come and do this for free. And, that in my opinion would kind of counteract just being so authoritative and regulatory with the commercial
I think Mr. Manager's community cleanup program is meant to address some of that. Is that?
And that is correct. We want to take a very aggressive approach to really eliminate any barriers or obstacles as it relates to allowing for folks to move trash, waste, and debris out of their businesses or out of their residence, et cetera. And so I can see that as a element associated with the program in March. And then I think it's incumbent upon us to put in some of the things that you've articulated, Councilman, into the next iteration of the contract when we go through a competitive solicitation process to look at some of those elements to make sure that we're giving every opportunity to discard of some things that traditionally are hard to discard of. So we can look to maybe the variation of the community cleanups that we would like to run in March, maybe adding an element as you've communicated as part of this discussion.
Okay, so we have something planned, or you have something?
What I'm asking for is, as part of the modification that we're requesting the board to consider, we would like to roll out this program on March, on every Saturday, basically, that if you bring it out to the curb, even if it's a family member, we're picking them up. So we want.
Wait, you're gonna pick up someone's family member?
Anything that's on the curb, we want to pick it
Watch
up.
out.
So we want to, and then we want to work with each of you in your respective districts that if there is seniors or folks in our community that need some manpower to assist in moving the items out of their back of their yard or from their home or those, we want to work on some type of waiver program where we can access the property with their permission to assist them in doing that. So working with you in your respective districts to coordinate the cleanups holistically. And so if the board is in agreement in moving forward in this fashion, then staff will work on the marketing components, then working to make sure that we have what we would call strike teams in each of your districts, that we say, Ms. Jones at this address, staff will be there at 9 o'clock on Friday, Mr. Johnson will be there at 10 o'clock on Friday, to get all the items out there to assist the residents. So on Saturday, when the trucks do come up, they can pick it up and go ahead and move on to the next home.
And you wanna do this weekly?
I want to do it for, I want to do it every Saturday for the month of March.
March.
Every Saturday for the month of March,
Citywide?
citywide.
We would be targeting single-family homes or multifamily. Is there any limits on?
I want us to go citywide in every, whether it's, the commercial element as well as single-family, multifamily, what have you. I don't want it to be any excuse as to why, we couldn't get to that trash, waste, or debris.
And this cost is gonna be bared by the city?
This is a cost that, in working with Waste Management in our existing contract, that we have the ability to do a program like this. And this is something that we would look to do once a year. And it kind of dovetails into some other conversations as we relate to code compliance, code enforcement, because I think the biggest challenges we have in some areas is effectively a bulk pickup can cost anywhere from, what's the standard rate for if somebody put a couch on the,
If you put it out on your collection day, there is no cost.
That's right.
And the contract has a detail in it that we will collect up to 500 cubic yards of illegal dumping free every year for the city. That runs out pretty quickly here. After that, it's a much reduced rate. It's $15 a cubic yard. So either it's dealt with for free, and that's the direction we get from Public Works. Probably wouldn't be somebody's couch, probably an illegal lot would be the scenario where we're collecting material for free.
So is that the 500 cubic yards when we do the pull out to the road?
go ahead.
If I may, sir. Please be reminded, we have multiple cleanups currently throughout the city, from different organizations where the city participates. That 500 yards is eaten up pretty fast with the existing, just trash pickup in the right-of-ways that are done annually that we've all participated in. The concept that we're bringing forward is that the revenue generated from this new program will offset the cost for the program that we're describing of bringing it out. As Ms. Smith indicated, it's $15 per yard. So we are anticipating this program basically being neutral in the way of cost. We'll generate some revenue, but we will use that revenue to offset cost for this new program that'll be held annually in March to sort of spring clean the community from a bulk perspective.
And, you know, I'm just only erring on the side of I want a better community. I thank you for bringing this forward, Mr. Evans, but I don't know if once a year is enough. You know, I think March is going to be a great opportunity to see how this kicks off, but, you know, we probably need to do this around the holiday times, because I'm telling you, when trash and
Yeah.
toys and Christmas and, you know, all of that stuff happens, it's it can be kind of large.
And to your point, I would love to be able to roll it out multiple times. I think the challenge that we have is that modifying the agreement and understanding that the agreement is set to sunset in about a year or what have you. And I think as another element of the new agreement is to call for these types of situations on a more frequent basis, because we may find out it's so successful that we may need to want to do it quarterly. And then the other side is Waste Management is also sharing in the risk associated with this agreement. So in most cases, you know, they're willing to share with us as the partner in this, but then obviously if we do it more frequently, we would have to look at the nuances of the agreement and a little bit more specificity.
If I may, this is a little dangerous to talk about funds that could be generated, because every city's different. The CLEAN program returned over $30,000 to Delray this year so far. So that's a lot of cleanup to do.
How much?
Delray has a more of a situation than Riviera does with overages.
Did you say 300 or 30?
30.
I was going to say, oh
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
we're doing that then.
No, sir. It returned about 30,000 to the cities. That's ample, in my opinion, for quarterly cleanup. And we have 2 years together, so if we get this started, we can really make a difference in the next 2 years.
So two things I want to kind of say. So do we maintain a roll-off container at Public Safety Complex? I guess from the debris that our crews go out and pick up?
We do maintain multiple roll-offs. They're not at the Public Safety Complex. They're over at the old city, the old Public Works site on Avenue L, because obviously that is where we've always done it, and it's set up that way. It's open. We can do separation and run heavy equipment. The Public Safety site wouldn't be a good place for that sort of. We're running almost a mini waste operation. We bring materials, separate asphalt, concrete, vegetation. So we do that operation over at the fuel island, over by the fuel island, the old site.
So how is that handled as far as how is that taken care of as far as with Waste Management?
So we're into a different section of our contract. In a different portion of the contract, the city is allotted a specific number of dumpsters. I'm gonna turn it over to you since this is your, all right. Yeah, the city's allotted 14 dumpsters per contract, and they are spread out throughout the city. There's a 4-yarder at the beach, an 8-yard at the marina. City Hall has a 4-yarder, a 6-yard at police station. Public Works has a 6 and a 20-yarder. So you can see, we knew that when the RFP was let, that all of the city sites would need this service, and so that is built into the contract and at no cost.
So you're saying 14 per contract?
I'd have to count them exactly, but it's plus or minus 14, and they're all at city facilities. But
So-
the contract, I do believe, has language that we would not be able to take all of the city's debris and put it in our free dumpster. That's not the way it's set up.
Okay, so let me be clear. So we have 14 different locations or 14 different containers, but how often are they picked up?
How often are they picked up? I don't know off the top of my head, sir. We've worked it out with Waste Management. They're picked up frequently enough for them not to be an eyesore.
So these are dumpsters and not roll-offs.
Correct.
So I'm speaking of, like, I know during the time of the hurricane, we had roll-offs at Public Safety. We don't normally have those
We do.
roll-offs.
Some
So
of those are roll-offs.
Yes, sir.
I missed
Some of those
that.
are roll-offs.
I missed
Roll-off is that big, when you see a construction site and you see that long
20-yarder.
container, you see them picked up by semis and it's open on the top, they put debris, that's a roll-off. So
Okay.
we have some at Public Works, we have one at Public Works specifically recycling. We have one for just general debris at the Public Safety building, just because of the nature of our operation at that site. And then we have, I think 2 over at the old Public Works site, which is where the trimmings from medians and cutting down trees and picking up limbs throughout the city, that's where that type of material goes.
And if I may,
Yes.
if I may, in answer to Councilwoman Lanier's question about another challenge, we found we need to exempt schools as well. I know that there's a photograph of a school here, so another challenge was, we learned in Wellington that schools have major cleanouts at certain times, and we certainly do not want to take revenue from the school system, so I just have to interject.
You don't? I would love to,
Well, if that's, it's.
but
a
we don't
decision-
have any regulatory authority over the school district,
Well,
so.
and also your facilities are not included.
Yeah, I see we're
Well-
on here, a couple of them.
Yes, well, the pictures are automatic. Our trucks
You said-
automatically take pictures.
Ocean Mall and Marine.
Yeah, we on that.
Yeah,
Well, so this is what the contract calls for, and here's where I'm going with this. And I know Mr. Bailey and Mr. Evans, we've talked about this, but there was 28th Street, right where we are now, this street here, there's 2 things about this street. We know we have an appliance problem with a particular resident that's going through code enforcement already. However, there's abandoned vehicles, but the other thing that startled me, there was a funeral processional that was about to take place, and God knows where all of this trash just appeared from, right as we were doing road construction. So it was very difficult to navigate because there was heavy equipment. And as much as I know that that was probably dumped there illegally, I want to know that we have the capability of going to pick it up, because we have the responsibility of maintaining safe roads regardless, and not worry about who the bad actors are unless we catch them in the act. But I want to make sure that we do have a claw truck to go out and pick up those things when they become an obstruction of traffic or something of that sort. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We
But-
have a process on how that's done, but yes, we could, but understand, as soon as we touch it and pick it up, we pay for it. And
But-
there's no mechanism for regress but to your point, if it's a safety issue or whatever, we go get it.
Right.
But we
we pay-
absorb that cost inside of Public Works.
Okay, but we pay for it in these roll-off containers? Do they go into that roll-off
And
container?
again, remember I said the contract is very specific of what we get for free. So what you just described is not something that's inside that space of it's free. We would have to pay for that.
So my question is, once you get that claw truck and you fill up that container, where does it go from there? You have to drive it out to the dump? Or do you replace it with, do you drop it into a roll-off?
So it's complicated, only because we're being very general of what it is. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the material, we may have to actually take a really hard look at what is it. There's some things we don't want to bring back to the Public Works site for obvious reasons. There's some things the dump won't take for obvious reasons. So my team has to be very careful of what the it is and where we're allowed to take it. So there's a element of analysis of, we can't just grab anything that we don't know what it is, because certain things have to go to certain places, sir. So
Okay.
it's a little more complicated than just grabbing a couch off the side of the road.
Ellen, can you guys pick up derelict vehicles?
Ah.
Just pick them up with the claw truck and drop them right in there, because I'm telling you. And you know, here's what I realized, right? It's becoming so bad, right? The first Friday of the new year, there was a huge accident at the intersection of 28th Street and Avenue O, all because there was an abandoned vehicle and somebody was speeding and the other person couldn't see around that abandoned vehicle, and it sent about 4 people to the hospital. And it's like that, I know we're gonna get into that further in the discussion, but this all goes to the same thing. And I gotta commend Councilwoman Hubbard for starting that Clean and Safe program about, making, at least the trash piles at the very minimum, making sure trash goes onto the pile, because, sometimes we have a lot of transients who don't have a vested interest in the community, and wherever they can drop it, they'll drop it. So that's why I know some of the residents who are senior citizens, they're not the ones that's out carrying out 2 old sofas and dropping them in the front of their yard. Somebody is just dropping stuff. And as much as an eyesore it is and it costs us money, I would much rather try to figure out how we can beautify the neighborhood and and cost is definitely important, but definitely worry about the cost later, because it's a nuisance when you have to see children on the sidewalk navigate around stuff that shouldn't even be put out to dump until 4 days from now, you know? So those are my concerns.
All right, anyone else? So, Mr. Evans, what do you need from us, basically, just a consensus in order to bring it before the agenda in, you said February?
Yes, Madam Chair, we would just want to see that if the board has the appetite to consider modifying the solid waste agreement with Waste Management to incorporate the clean program, and then also to move forward with the intended actions for our community cleanups in March.
All right.
And
Go ahead.
Mr. Evans, so don't we have have we already not, I guess, can you give us some more details on the March? Because I thought we have some things scheduled in March already that would kind of create possibly a conflict. Or how does it work when we do it in March?
As far as the, the marketing, the promotion, the logistics associated with that, we wanted to see if the council's desire is to do it. The program, we can easily, if the council thinks that we need to push it back a month or two, we can certainly do that. We thought utilizing that time, spring cleaning, especially during spring break when people may be off, that may be the optimal time to do it. But we can work through the logistics and bring that more in a concrete fashion as to how the program will roll out, because we obviously need to speak with representatives from Waste Management, from Public Works, and then with you all as it relates to how you would like to coordinate these strike teams working with you to assist the residents throughout your respective districts. So we still need to do a little bit more inner working on our side as the staff stand.
So would you imagine it's like a half-day effort or something like a 9 to 12 or 9 to 1 type thing, or?
My thing is as long as we can have the folks from Waste Management out there, if they can be out there from sun up to sundown, we want to be able to get everything we can.
But, and just so I'm clear, so you said you're gonna get individuals, which I imagine are part of the strike team, maybe some even city workers. We're gonna go through this process of having them to sign waivers, so if they have to go onto a property owner's property and pull it out to the road, it would seem like, I don't know how these routes of trucking works, but it would just seem like it would be something quite massive, and we're talking about doing it every single Saturday?
For the month of March.
Would we do it simultaneously across the city, or are we doing a certain district one day, or?
We would probably, for the purposes of making sure is probably doing it by district, because then they can deploy more resources
To tackle one
in
district?
that area, yeah.
Okay. Madam Chair, is there an opportunity to hear some input from the community on this?
Not during workshops. We
Well-
can bring it before it's gonna be on the agenda. We can put it on the agenda, even though maybe at the end of the month. I mean, either the end of the month or whenever our
Well-
next meeting is in regards to the community cleanup, so that only that part will be discussed. Maybe they can give some ideas then
I just was curious because.
to go in more detail. I mean, right now, we're just deciding if that's something we want to do, and all the details that you're looking for is something that we can work on between now and then.
Madam Chair, but
Yes.
right now, we're discussing if we're gonna allow them to do the clean program, right?
Right, but that's the only thing we're deciding, do we
Right.
want to do it? The
Yeah, but
details
he
of
wants to-
doing it,
He
But
wants
other
to
stuff-
coordinate that in conjunction?
in conjunction with
The
what?
clean program is certainly something that we want to do, but we also want to incorporate the element for the spring cleaning or what have
Right,
you.
it's two things, yeah.
It's the two things, yeah.
But you're speaking more of that community cleanup day, right? Is that what you're saying about the public?
Well, no,
Or what
I wanted to hear if, that's why I was asking, could you indulge me in asking?
I don't
allowing-
want to start something that we haven't been
Okay.
doing. I really don't,
Okay.
because then that'll open up for some
And-
other stuff.
And keep in mind, so that's great, Mr. Evans, I fully support it, but April 18th, 2020 is the Great American Cleanup, which I think the organizations on the west side will be doing something in Morrow Heights Park or maybe Cunningham Park, as well as I know there's gonna be something done over on Singer Island, and then also, the CRA CDC program does something. on Great American Cleanup Day?
It certainly boils down to if the board wants to look to do it in April or March or anything like that, that's certainly within your purview. I just want to see if the board had the appetite of us rolling out the program, so maybe it's something that we do in conjunction with the Great American Cleanup, and that's the time in which, you know, the month of April is the time in which we do it. We just need to coordinate with Waste Management. We thought, you know, that springtime may be optimal, because that's hopefully.
March is good. March is good. We can follow up with the Great American Cleanup, because it's gonna be going on anyways, but I think we need to get on top of it as soon as possible.
And we can just clean every month if we
Yeah.
want to do that too. But what I'm saying is, for the sake of this conversation, the two items that we were speaking of, if we want to move forward with that, or at least to bring it on the agenda, if we want to give more time to it in terms of how the program will roll out for the community cleanup day, then we can put it on
Yeah.
as a discussion, deliberation item on one of our next meetings, so that the public can comment on it.
Just one last question for Mr. Mayor. So you're gonna have some ample time to send out notices to your 900 account holders?
The sooner the program, the moment the program is adopted, we will hit the mail with a flyer describing it, and we'll do it again. We'll have 2 flyers. And then if the city would like, we could do a soft rollout for a month. That means no charges, no revenue for the city for that month, but it really does give people a fair heads up about
Sure.
this is about what's
That-
going to happen.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's great, because, you know, trash is trash, but we need businesses to run the city. So I think it's fair in trying to make sure that everybody is aware, so it's not just a violation of due process, or we're just hitting them across the head. So I think I would be in support of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we certainly would work in tandem to market and promote, you know, what the changes are in the program and what it means to our local business community, so they're aware. So it would be a coordinated effort as far as the communication piece.
And I'm telling you, after that amnesty program, Ms. Bostic, we got to be on top of them, because just like Waste Management hits them, we need to make sure that we're holding up on our end too, because we got to change the perception of the city and how people, when people come to Riviera Beach, that it's in fact, we live up to our motto of being the best waterfront city, and that becomes the very first thing. How you determine that is how it looks when you get off of I-95 when you're a tourist, or when you travel down Congress from the airport and you enter into the city, and it looks like somewhere you want to be. So I'm certainly in support of that.
All right.
If the city, indulge me one last comment, the city is as it seems in favor of the clean program, the sooner it's implemented, the sooner it falls to you. And if February agenda is appropriate, that's fine. If there's a sooner agenda, maybe that's something the city would like to entertain as well, putting in a January agenda, just get going.
All right, Ms. Lanier, Mayor Felder, any
And I
additional
did
comments?
get your contract.
Thank you, Ms. Lanier.
I did get your contract before, so thank you.
Keep taking this one. No, are you finished? You finished? Okay, thank you so much. All right, so are you clear on
I've
the
got my
direction?
I've got my direction. Mr. Bailey will be putting this item on the agenda for February 5th. And the community cleanup information, we'll work through the nuances of that and look to put it on the agenda at that time as well for discussion purposes.
All right. Okay, Mr. Evans, what point I noticed they brought lunch in. I mean, I'm not dying to eat, but I didn't know where you all wanted. Did you want to start something and then
If
break a little later?
Yeah, if the
Council?
board would indulge us, if we can get through
Go ahead. Yeah.
these next 2 items, I think.
Okay.
And then we can break for lunch.
All right.
Madam Chair, are we ready to proceed?
We're ready?
Okay.
Yep.
Madam Chair, the next phase of this presentation, after hearing about the CLEAN program and our intention to effectively take some more proactive steps in cleaning up our community, one of the things we want to talk about is the process for properties and code compliance. City staff has worked with the legal team as well as development services and law enforcement to look at ways to address some of the code compliance related issues. This presentation will include discussions about code compliance, nuisance abatement, chronic nuisances, unsafe building abatement, nuisance services, and the foreclosure proceeding. One of the things that we have looked at, and law enforcement will also be party to the presentation, is how do we effectively address some of the nuisance properties we have in our community and some of the chronic nuisance properties. We know that sometimes code enforcement and chronic nuisance issues in our communities tend to harbor some criminal elements, and we want to take a more proactive and aggressive stance as it relates to cleaning up our community, but also ensuring that we don't have absentee landlords and that the tenants understand that our desires are to effectively make Riviera Beach the best city to live, work, and play. We have presentations today by Ms. Christy Godot with the law firm of Glenn Torsivia's firm, and we have Cheryl Bostic, that is our code compliance administrator, the acting director, Jeff Gagnon, and then law enforcement will be here to talk about some other elements associated with the discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to staff and Ms. Godot.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. My name is Christy Gatto, and Ms. Bostic and I have been working together for years to do what used to be code enforcement and is now code compliance. What we're going to try to do here is to provide some information so everybody understands the code compliance process and some recommendations that Ms. Bostic and I have brought forward to perhaps make the process more efficient and effective for the city. So this is up on the screen. I don't know if you can see it, our current code compliance process. It's a process that's taken essentially from Florida statute, adopted into your code, and implemented through code compliance. This process involves a two-step hearing process before the special magistrate if a violation is found. And just to give you, and Ms. Bostic, if you want to jump in at any point, just to give you an understanding of how much work is done behind the scenes for each code case, I can walk you through a basic case. What typically happens is you'll get a complaint that comes in, whether it's from a resident, it comes in from the city manager's office, or a code officer observes the violation themselves. It generates an inspection. They go to the property, they do the inspection. At the inspection, they look at the specific violation if it was a complaint, but they also check the property for any other violations. The initial inspection will typically generate a notice of violation to the property owner. The notice of violation is served both, it could be hand delivery, we are required to do it by certified mail, and regular mailing, and if we receive notice that it wasn't received, then we post the property.
Post it, meaning?
We take the notice of violation and literally post it on the door, or if it's a vacant lot, you actually post it on a placard that's posted at the property.
Certified mail is required by local ordinance or state statute?
Both. By state statute, we have to make an attempt at certified mail and regular mail, and if that doesn't come back, then we have to do a posting. The address that we send the mailing to is the address provided on the property appraiser's office. So oftentimes if someone doesn't have an updated address on property appraiser's information, then the posting is typically the only thing that they may get. That's an issue that we run into often. So that is the initial notice of violation. We serve it on them, and by law, we have to give them a reasonable time to bring the property into compliance. So typically that can be anywhere from at least 30 days to longer, depending on what the violations are. The inspector will then try to reach out to the property owner and make contact, and will often do several repeat inspections to see if the property has been brought into compliance on a voluntary basis. If it is not, then the inspector will generate what we call a non-compliance letter. And that's a letter to let the property owner know that the property is still not in compliance. We then mail that out by certified mail and regular mail, and post it usually at the same time to make sure that the property owner has a second notice that their property is not in compliance. We then give them some more time to comply, and if they don't comply at that point, we set them for a magistrate hearing. For the magistrate hearing, we also have to serve another notice on them, and that's the notice of hearing. And that also gets sent by certified mail and regular mail and gets posted at their property. We have to give that at least 10 days before the hearing. At the hearing, which we have at City Hall, they're the third Thursday of every month, starting at 2 o'clock, before the magistrate, which is Corey Smith. We bring forth the violations, and the code officer will testify to each of his cases that have now reached that notice of hearing status. The code inspector, once he or she presents their case, the property owner is given an opportunity to present any evidence or testimony that they may have regarding the violations, and then the magistrate makes a ruling. Once the magistrate makes a ruling, if the ruling is that the property is in violation, is there a question?
Yes. So the code enforcement magistrate hearing, what rules dictate that? Is this any rules of?
It's a quasi-judicial hearing, so the magistrate sort of sits as the judge before these cases, and the initial role that the magistrate plays is to determine whether there is a violation on the property. So
basically, like, that would be the establishing of any kind of probable cause.
yes.
Equivalent to establishing of a probable cause.
Exactly, and that is the property owner's first due process hearing, because the property owner has the right to be at the hearing, provided notice of the hearing, and the property owner can bring forward any kind of witness or testimony that the property owner wants.
So, what I'm saying is, so that is that governed by rules of not criminal procedure, civil procedure?
It is, but they're relaxed.
Okay.
So it's not your hard and fast rules of evidence, they're relaxed rules of procedure. It's sort of informal. We still have the basic due process that's provided to every property owner, but it's not as strict rules of evidence.
Okay, so if I can take a step back, I was paying a utility bill and I looked in that message board and I seen notice of violations for properties. What point and what step and what authority is that utilized?
What we do, the code officers will post the property, take a picture of that evidence that they posted the property. Then we compile a list of all the properties that were posted. And it has to be posted at the property as well as the city hall.
Okay.
So in that bulletin, you will see all the properties that's been posted for lot clearing, notice of violation, or hearing.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, when I used to see that up there, I was wondering, why is this up here? So it's required.
That's letting the public know that these properties have been cited and
Members,
service hasn't
don't get
been.
your property posted inside of City Hall, so please, please comply with the first notice.
So
Sorry.
at the magistrate hearing, if the property is found in violation, the magistrate by law has to give the property owner a reasonable amount of time to bring the property into compliance. So the property owners are given 2 bites at the apple at least to bring their property in compliance. The first bite is after the city provides the notices of the violation, and then after the magistrate finds them in violation, they're given more time to bring the property into compliance. If after all of that has transpired and they don't bring the property into compliance, that's when fines will start to accrue. And the fines are recommended by the city to the magistrate, and the magistrate has a final authority to say what the fine amount would be if they don't bring the property into compliance. So that's the first hearing. That sets fines, there's a violation. And you'll see in our orders, it's called a final order, and it fines the violation, and it sets forth the fine amount that will accrue if they don't timely bring the property into compliance. In this current process, the next step is to take them to a second hearing where we impose a fine and lien on their property. In the past, what we've done is to try to hold off on actually imposing the lien to see if we can get the property owner to bring the property into compliance voluntarily. If they do so, we have an internal process through the special magistrate to reduce the fines once the property is brought into compliance. If the property is not brought into compliance, then what we would do is take them back to a second hearing to impose the fines and liens. And at that second hearing, the inspector will present evidence that the property is still not in compliance, the amount of fines that have accrued on the property, and we ask the magistrate to impose the lien. At that point, the magistrate's really only discretion is to determine the fine amount he wants to impose. Once that second order is entered and it's recorded in the public records, it is a fine, or it is a lien on their property and any other property that they own.
So, Madam Chair, if I
Go
can
ahead.
kind of ask some questions to that. So one of the questions is the discretion that you spoke of that the magistrate has. And before you answer that question, these proceedings related to code enforcement is regulated or promulgated by what statute?
It's under Chapter 162, Part 1. There's 2 parts in 162, so you'd want to only look at Part 1. And we have adopted essentially that same process within the city's Code of Ordinances.
Okay. And the discretion,
What the magistrate is looking at the second hearing is he is by statute to look at 3 things. He looks at.
statute being 162?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
What the property owner has done to bring the property into compliance, the history of this property owner's code compliance violations in the past, and the severity of the violation. Now, our magistrate looks at those things when he sets forth the original fine amount, typically. But sometimes when you get to that second hearing, some things may change and he may decide to increase. Usually it's a decrease the fine amount that's actually going to be imposed as a lien. But those are the 3 things he's required to look at.
Can you repeat them again? Property
He looks
owner?
at the past history of the violations, what the owner has done to correct the violations,
And severity.
and the severity of the violations.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So once the lien is established on the property, that's kind of where code compliance process comes to an end. And I think what's also on your agenda today is to talk about some other processes that I think those processes are things you need to look at that point to determine how do we go further with this property to bring it in compliance or even potentially foreclose. So that's kind of where code compliance, their process comes to an end, unless at some point the property comes into compliance and they could request a reduction. Now, so you understand, if only the first order is entered and there's only fines on the property, we retain jurisdiction before the special magistrate to ask for a fine reduction. If we take
When you say we, you're speaking from what perspective?
code compliance. So code compliance keeps the jurisdiction over fines. Once the fines are converted at that second hearing to a lien, the jurisdiction changes to the city council. And if a property has a lien on it, jurisdiction of whether to reduce or waive that lien is before the council. So by example, Stony Brook, we imposed a lien on Stony Brook. When Stony Brook came to do its renovation project, we had to come to you to ask for a reduction in that lien. It could not go before the special magistrate because the special magistrate doesn't have jurisdiction over liens under our current process.
So, if I may, Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
that's the only situation I recalled of city council being involved with waiving or releasing liens. Is there another process that liens were released?
There's been other times where we've come before city council for settlement agreements on liens. We've had a couple mobile home parks that were being sold. And as part of that selling of the mobile home parks that were going to be redeveloped, we became before the council to ask for a settlement agreement which reduced those lien amounts with the council's approval.
Okay. And to go back to what I heard you say, the lien is not just placed on that property, but any other properties that are owned
Correct.
within the city or the county?
It can actually go throughout the entire state of Florida. Oftentimes, you're just looking at Palm Beach County because usually they own the property within the same county, but arguably it could go throughout the entire state of Florida. But that's what's important to understand about a code enforcement lien is it's an umbrella lien.
Cross attaches.
Exactly. So when it gets on your property, it's a nasty lien because it reaches out to every property that you own.
But so here's where I've already experienced this, and this goes back to the when you get brought information from residents. So there's a property that has a lien on it, and then there's multiple family members that's listed at the property appraiser's office as being the owner. So should every one of those property owners that's listed on property A with those liens then now be subject to cross attachments to other properties they have throughout Palm Beach County?
Technically, yes. And it can get really, it becomes a real nightmare when you have multiple property owners. Say there was, you know, an estate situation and they left it to multiple family members. Those family members technically have a lien on not only that property that they only own a percentage in, perhaps other properties that they own.
So, and that too is regulated under 162?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that is our current process, and it's a process that's been in place for years. Some of the background information I think was also provided in the memo that's in the agenda packet is just some information on how you make a complaint, a variety of ways you can make a complaint to code compliance. The fine amount that has accrued to date, that's looking back since 2000. That number may be a little bit high, but I think because of some of the IT issues the city experienced in the past, they're still trying to recover some of that information. And then you have the open cases, which is really anything pending that involves an initial inspection all the way to a property that has liens on it that's accruing. So that's what the pending cases are. Again, as we talked about with our current process, there's both benefits and negative aspects of it. We do provide multiple notice to property owners, so there should never be a surprise code enforcement case. However, it does take a lot of staff time and energy to provide all of those notices. The second bullet there is no administrative fees, and I think this is something that the City of Riviera Beach really does well. Because I represent several cities where we do code compliance. And in Riviera Beach, the first time as a property owner you get taken through code enforcement, if you're found in violation, the city does not seek any administrative fees from you. So if you're found in violation and the magistrate says you've got 30 days to fix your property and you fix it, there's no cost to you. There's no fines assessed, there's no administrative costs for staff time. And the real benefit, I think, of that is then the property owner can use that money to invest in his or her property and bring it up to standard. You will see in other cities that they will charge administrative fees for your first violation. And those administrative fees can be anywhere from $20 to $100 to some cities charge up to $400 for your first violation. That's really driven by council policy and how aggressive you want to be with administrative costs. But right now, the city doesn't charge any administrative costs for your first violation, and I do think that's a benefit to your property owners to take that type of money and reinvest it in their property. These are some pictures that they're actually, I think, from 2017.
Yes.
But just to show you, how code compliance can work and take a property that has landscape issues, needs pressure cleaning and painting, and bring it up to a much better standard for the community. And you will see in streets where they do this type of increase in value that people have in their property, it has an effect through the entire neighborhood. And now you see their neighbors start to do it too. So this is the good news that code compliance is still providing to the city. What this slide is pointing out is some things that with the current process that we're having some issues with and how we would like to kind of streamline some of these things or get the council's decision on how you want to proceed with these types of issues. The number one thing is fines versus liens. As I've tried to explain, there's a distinction between a fine with the city with the first hearing and imposing a lien after the second hearing. What a lot of cities have gone to is a process where there's only one hearing. And the way that this works is after the first hearing, if the magistrate finds a violation, you enter an order that says, in 20 days, the property owner can request a second hearing. If no second hearing is requested, this order will automatically convert to a lien. You record that first order, and so quickly your case goes from a fine status to a lien status. The benefits to this are that we're not having to then reset another hearing, go before the magistrate a second time. Because what history has shown in other cities that have done this is it's rare that someone asks for that second hearing. So your fines automatically convert to lien. With the city's current process, that would mean that all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of folks coming before the city council to ask for lien reductions. So what a lot of cities have done along with this process is given their magistrate the ability to reduce liens. You can make the magistrate's ability to reduce lien as tight as you want or as loose as you want, meaning you can give the magistrate unfettered discretion to reduce fines as much as he or she wants to, or you can keep some reins on it and say they can only be reduced to this amount. It just is driven by council policy.
Okay, can I interrupt, Madam Chair?
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I'm thinking. So this code enforcement magistrate is appointed by the council, or is
Yes,
it by
sir.
the attorney?
It's appointed by the council. I believe it's still done by resolution.
It's by contract.
It's by contract now?
But
Okay,
is it
I'm sorry, it's by
Voted
contract.
on by us?
No, it doesn't come to you.
I'm sorry, you said it doesn't.
It does not come to you.
But I thought that was an issue before, that we had a magistrate that wasn't properly appointed, that someone challenged the,
There was a contract that expired.
There was, yeah,
oh, is that what it was?
yes.
I think
Okay,
the process used to be that they'd take the contract by resolution to the council, and then you would approve
it.
by resolution.
and that kind of sunsetted,
Right.
and,
I think so.
okay, so it kind of puts us in a position, right? I would like to see if we delegate that responsibility of mitigating liens to the magistrate, because now we just had a previous session on us being involved in operations, and now that puts more burden back on us to be lobbied about specific code violations. And, you know, we're policymakers, we're not an adjudicating body, and then now we get tied down into the weeds of actually having to go into a public meeting. And I really am glad, I don't know who it was that took code enforcement meetings off of Channel 18, but nobody wants their dirty laundry aired, right? And I definitely don't want to have to deal with it as a council member. I want to give whoever we have as a code enforcement magistrate that ability, so that way they can call him and not me. Well, I guess they can't even call him, because that'd be ex
That's correct.
parte,
That's
but
correct, they can't.
That's
at least that takes some burden off of us, because that's something I personally not want to do.
And that is, I think, what would be recommended would be to push that off on the magistrate. And like I said, you can just establish how much control you want to have over that process by ordinance or by just a resolution policy.
But if they're not favorable, they still have an opportunity to appeal to the
Absolutely.
governing body.
Yes.
You can
Correct.
put that, you can put that in there, but if the magistrate enters a ruling that says, I'm only gonna reduce your fine to X amount, typically they have to appeal that to the circuit court. Now, you could establish, if you wanted to, a policy that they could appeal to the city council, but I don't know that that would be recommended.
That would just pull you right back in where you're
Right.
just trying to get out of.
Well, at least I just don't want to be the first line of, you know?
You either want to
Because-
be in it or you don't want to be in it. Because the thing is, they could possibly every time say, well, I don't like the way they did it, and then it
Yeah,
comes right back to you.
But, you know, I've actually sat through one of those code enforcement hearings, and this is not something that I've seen that code enforcement the magistrate looks to nail anybody. I think they're very reasonable and very judicious in how they handle these cases. I mean, I've seen so many extensions, they get, at least code enforcement goes beyond what I've seen in other places in trying to help folks.
So you're saying you would want to add that appeal process to come to us, because if it does come to us, it more than likely has had a number of opportunities of,
I believe so, and that's just my thought. We don't have to agree on it, but
I don't know. I mean, I haven't dealt with very few I think only maybe a couple have come before the board,
Yes, ma'am.
for us to do a reduction. So it's not like that even happens quite often.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask that question as well. Has a council member ever requested liens to be released? And if that's the case, why and how is that done? And
No, they
meaning
wouldn't
that
request it.
with this type of board, you know, we're trying to get away from that, but how is that possible?
It had happened though.
Yeah, I know. I'm asking.
I think a couple years ago, we had a workshop, and the big concern at that time were large fines and liens on homestead property.
Right.
And out of that came the decision to release the homestead liens. But that was sort of the council direction at that time. What we've never done is have a council member ask for a specific lien on specific property to come forward and release it or do something like that.
We actually did.
Yeah.
I can tell you, it was,
She was there.
it was
so
definitely, it did happen.
Were you approached by a citizen?
You want me to tell you the address?
No.
1201 Avenue U. And I thought that was the most.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I thought when I seen
Was
that,
that citizen?
that made me furious. Because here it is, I got folks who doesn't have the political wherewithal to know 4 out of the 5 council members to go up and say, hey, can you put this item on the agenda so I can get my lien release? And we released the lien, and I'm saying to myself, well, what about the little lady who gets $900 a month, who's, you know, all kind of medication? She doesn't know how to keep up her property, and she certainly doesn't know how to navigate through government and these political circles. And I just think that sometimes I want to be out of it because I want to be fair, and I want to be compassionate. But, you know, we get drawn into some things sometimes that we never get the end of it.
Councilperson, I believe that was a request for a partial release for the property of that address. They actually got a partial release, and we created an ordinance for that and a procedure how a respondent can get a separation from a property. But that respondent had to come back before the code enforcement to get the full release off his property.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is we become arbitrators, you know, and I don't know if that's the intended purpose of what we represent, but we don't represent you to the point of, you know, being able to circumvent what every other citizen has to go through or what best practices call for when you are dealing with code violations.
And I would agree with that to the extent that the magistrate can, you know, protect you from getting pulled into those individual situations. The process that we're recommending would do that. Code enforcement can be a fluid process, and there's times when you want to be more aggressive with code enforcement, and there's times when you want to perhaps relax code enforcement. And that's what I think your role as the governing board looks at in terms of, do we want to tighten up the reins or do we want to release them? And so when we talk a little bit more about the process we're going to propose, that's when we're looking for council direction in terms of, do we want to tighten up some things or keep some things more relaxed? So we sort of touched on the reduction process that we have currently just for fines. And the lien reductions being before the council. As I mentioned, foreclosure is an option, but it has limitations. And in your backup materials, a code enforcement lien cannot be foreclosed on homestead property. So if it's a homestead property that's had a lien sitting there for years, there's nothing that we can do about it. We can't foreclose that homestead property. Also with foreclosures, usually the first thing you do is you get a title search to look at what other encumbrances there may be on that property. If there's a superior mortgage that's valued higher than the property's valued at, you're probably not going to foreclose, because then you're going to take on that mortgage and have to end up paying the mortgage, or you'll be foreclosed by the mortgage holder. So there's 2 limitations. The third limitation is foreclosure can be time consuming, and the only person that's going to win in the foreclosure is your attorney.
You, right?
Correct. So you got to take a close look at every property to make sure, what is our end game? Is there some other tool that we have in our tool belt that we could use to try to bring this property into voluntary compliance in lieu of foreclosure? I can tell you back in 2006, our firm took on about 5 or 6 foreclosures that were identified by the city and approved by the city council to go forward for foreclosures. We had mixed results. I think we recovered 3 of the properties. 2 of the properties, I believe, settled, and 1 of the properties, the decision was made not to foreclose because it had a lot of encumbrances on it, and it just wasn't going to be worth working through all of that to try to recover the
So
property.
what happened with that property?
So we did not pursue the foreclosure. Eventually, someone, I think, bought that property. I think,
Which property?
the one that had all the different names on it.
I'm not really sure which one it is.
I think someone eventually bought that property and either demolished and it's now a vacant lot, but it was sort of taken out of our hands because the foreclosure was gonna be time-consuming and very expensive.
Well, here's what I'm actually looking at. So, and I know this has been the case. So I know a guy in the neighborhood, and I'm not going to speak to him hypothetically, but he said to me, and I just passed his house, and I was like, he know what I was looking at, and he knows what his yard looks like. And excuse my language, he said, "What the hell? They can't take it from me. It's homesteaded, right? There's no incentive for him to even clean it up." And he said, let me tell you what he said. It shocked me where I had looked it up. He said, the lien has to be released after 20 years. And I went back and I found out he was true. If it wasn't a foreclosure action initiated on him, the lien is released after 20 years. And while I like the militant position, I didn't like the fact that our hands are tied as a city because you know, we haven't exercised foreclosure, but we have to do something because these folks are savvy enough to figure out ways around it, and something just has to be done.
And I would suggest that that's where you have to start getting creative and looking at other ways that you can address that situation. If it is a real health and safety issue, you can always seek a court injunction to clean up the property. Can't foreclose it, but there's other ways that you could pursue to get if the gentleman who owns that property owns other property that the lien attaches to, you can foreclose on that other property. If he has any real assets, like a boat, these types of liens attach to personal property and real property. You could go after the boat. So you just have to start getting creative.
But and I get that. Those are creative ways for us to enforce compliance. And those are creative punitive actions. I really would like to see, and we can't legislate morality, that people would be more concerned about their neighborhoods. I'm looking for a creative way to get people involved. Thank you, manager, for bringing forth the item of, you know, let's make it where somebody can pull out their trash and we dump it for free and, you know, do all of that. But you know, when we have bad actors, if you will, some of them just have no regard to following the code anyways and pretty much will tell us where to go. And, you know, I feel bad for some of the officers, the code compliance officers, because I've literally seen it. And then if the assistant city manager was here, we've been through this situation where a constituent reached out and he said he was disgruntled with code enforcement. And I went, and the assistant city manager went to the extent of finding him the resources he needed to bring his property into compliance, and it was still like, you know, he gave us, you know, so much hassle, and he just said he wouldn't do it. And it's really tough, but the community suffers, the neighboring property suffers, so we got to really figure out a creative way, and it doesn't have to be punitive, but to get people to say, hey, I'm invested in this community, and that's, you know, that comes with these workshops that we talked about. And surely I agree, Saturdays sometimes allow us to hash out a little more of these things, but we have to really take a step because Riviera Beach, we don't get any favors from the news media. I can tell you that. When we opened up the park, that was it. When we had a winter wonderland, nobody showed up from the media. But when there's something wrong or there's some nuisance or some tragic accident, they're here. So we got to work on figuring out how to get that done. Thank you, Ms. Godot, for indulging.
You're welcome. Up on the screen now is to talk about the most recent homestead amnesty program, and I sort of mentioned it before, and this was where the liens on homestead properties were released. Code compliance is now going back, and for property owners who may not have known about this or did not take any action on it and did not clean up their properties, code compliance is now going back through and having to recite and record orders on homestead properties that for the last 2 years have just not done anything. We are looking at our next hearing, imposing some liens on a couple homestead properties, which have been a real problem and eyesore for the community. So we are moving forward on those properties.
And we didn't record on homestead properties for what reason?
Well, you record on it knowing we can't foreclose, but if that owner ever decides to sell his or her property, if it gets bought at a tax deed sale and there's surplus, once you have that lien recorded, it gives the city some leverage, not only in code enforcement, but in other areas to collect.
You said, I'm sorry, I tried. You said 28 million?
Pull your microphone down.
That's what we estimated the homestead fines and liens were that were released back in 2017. The total
28
amount.
million.
Now, keep in
Yes.
mind that number can sometimes on each property be close to $1 million. So it just varies from property to property how much those fines and liens are.
Well, Ms. Lanier, and I know it seems like a lot, but again, I don't never think the code enforcement program was intended to make money for the city.
No, I
So,
don't think so either, but
I mean, but
that's a
yeah,
lot of
it is a
money.
lot. But they were released because of compliance.
No,
No.
No.
no,
That
council
was a-
decision.
Okay, so
So it was a
Now-
council decision to release them?
Correct.
Based on what?
My understanding was that at the time, there was a feeling in the community that these fines and liens were encumbering the homestead property, and if these homestead property owners were relieved of that burden, many of them would take the opportunity to reinvest in their properties because they'd be able to go out and get a mortgage or a second mortgage to reinvest in their properties. It also relieved some of them who owned other properties because they no longer had a lien that cross-attached to, say, a rental property they owned.
and,
So it cleaned up those issues, and that was a strong feeling, as I understand it, at that time.
So one more question to follow up to that. So that means that there was something in place to make sure that that happened. If we released all of these $28 million worth of liens, then did we have a program in place that said, okay, after a year or 2 years, did the property improve?
That was
It
just
said
their normal code compliance process, where they would go and re-inspect properties or look at properties they were just driving by to see whether properties were coming into compliance.
Can
Right,
you
we
go
could-
to the previous slide?
Yes,
Because I
ma'am.
think it said something about that. Most homes, the fourth
Did not.
bullet point, the second one from the bottom.
Most of them didn't take advantage of the amnesty order.
So
So-
the liens
Here-
were
here-
released.
They were released, but a lot of those, several of those that were released were not in compliance. Therefore, we basically was still with a non-compliance property, but didn't have anything tied to it.
So, I want to say this. I know I just kind of threw the grapevine because someone mentioned it to me. Watch this, Mr. Evans. Somebody mentioned this to me and said, hey, can you get me that code compliance position on that they are advertising at the city? I'm like, I don't know anything about that. I don't check the employment page. But obviously, I believe that there is a need for additional code compliance officers.
We can always use an additional staff, but there's currently no position open in code
But within the
compliance.
last 2 or 3 weeks,
That was an error. It was
oh,
removed.
it was an error?
Yes,
But
sir.
here's what I would say.
Somebody's trying to sneak in another.
You know, I really dislike the fact, and I love the fact that we can help people where we can, but if we release $28 million worth of liens, there need to be somebody dedicated within this office, code compliance, that's gonna go out and pay attention closely to those properties in particular, because by now, we're in the 2020, I would hope if you had to go and get a mortgage or something to make the improvements, you would have done it by now. But we can't allow people to get a free waiver and then turn around and not do anything with the property. And I would hope that we can have somebody in particular, Mr. Evans, to kind of look at that, because, you know, we can't give free lunch. We don't give
Right.
free water bills, so we definitely can't allow people.
But
You're
we are
starting back
reciting
now,
them,
right?
and
See
some
the
have
bottom?
already been recited,
last one.
reheard before the hearing, and we did not send anything for recording for 2 years, and that would have ended October 1st, 2018. So effectively, now we can start recording our orders that have been heard, and place the order back on those properties that did not comply.
And Councilman, if I may, One of the things that I would like to do as part of the community cleanup program is every property that has code enforcement notifications, that has received documents, would get a nice personal letter from us that says we have this community program that we're encouraging you to participate in. So there should not be any excuse, for lack of a better term, to be able to try to at least bring some elements of compliance as it relates to those properties, in addition to anything that we can do from the staff side. And then that's the nature of this conversation and not the items, is that we know that beautification of our community is a priority and a priority of this board. And so that's why we want to look at some public policy that provides a little bit more tools in the proverbial toolbox, so we can get some things into compliance and ultimately clean up our community that we know will effectively raise property value. So, you know, the policies are the first thing, then obviously staff resources and additional investments will come down the pipeline.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So what if we have homeowners that are renting properties that are not keeping up with them? Do they fit the program, Mr. Evans, for us to go in and help them, and they're receiving rent for that property?
The way that we would roll out the program is that we would not discriminate against any property owner or renter or what have you. We're going to we want every household to participate. So in essence, if somebody owns 10 properties in the community and there's issues with regards to those 10 properties, they are able and eligible to participate in the program. Because we wanted to effectively eliminate the excuse to the fact that says, well, you know, I don't have the means to get a pickup truck to throw things out, or there was not the manpower to assist in moving some of those things. So we want to eliminate as many of those pinch points for folks to assist in effectively cleaning up our community.
I think it should be a case by case. Because if I have somebody that's owning 10 units that's collecting rent, and he's not putting money back into his apartments or whatever, we're gonna come fix his place up, and he's still collecting money. I love the program, but I think it should be more like a case, as we kind of vet, you know, each person, and we give the help to those that need help.
And the challenge with that is, you know, looking at if there's 12,000 single-family residential parcels in Riviera Beach, it would be hard for us to effectively try to, you know, manage the ownership. And then you have a situation where there may be somebody that owns 6 or 7 houses and says, I need the help, and then somebody that conceivably that you know doesn't. How would you determine and make those it just leaves some gray area versus the carte blanche to say, you know what, no excuse for anyone. We're trying to clean up the community, and by any means and any resource available to us, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, how do we try to get those folks that are chronic violators of the policy? That's why some of the new ordinances that we're looking to put in place will target some of those issues and put some more teeth behind it.
So one of the things to sort of dovetail into that is the new ordinance that we're proposing primarily to do 3 things: to sort of streamline the code enforcement process, create a lien reduction process that the special magistrate would have jurisdiction over, and codify some of the things that internally Ms. Bostic and her staff have been doing that help to streamline the process. Like the last one on there is to allow for a stipulation where a property owner says, yeah, my property's in violation, I just need more time to come into compliance. Allow the magistrate to enter an order without the property owner having to take the time out of his or her day to come to a hearing. The new process would flow a little bit like this to streamline things. Again, the new process would include that one order that would then automatically be converted to a lien without the necessary of a second hearing unless the property owner requested it.
And, excuse me, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So, Ms. Godot, are these, this process laid out to the, violator? when they receive this notice, or is this just something that we keep internally?
We could certainly do that in a notice. What typically the notice lays out, the initial notice of violation lays out what the violation is, the time they need to bring it into compliance, and obviously phone numbers for code enforcement to reach out to talk about the violations. But what we would do is try to streamline it and figure out what is the most effective way for the city to address the process and make sure that it's not punitive in nature, but we're doing the most we can to encourage compliance. I think we've already sort of talked about some of these things for council's consideration as the governance board is determining, how much notice, if you want to charge administrative fees, the lien reduction process, and if you want to put constraints on the magistrate or not. Those are sort of policy considerations. One that Ms. Bostic mentioned is partial releases. Oftentimes you'll get a request for a partial release since code enforcement liens attached to all your property. You can also lay out a process in your new ordinance to address how you do partial releases.
And is there if I'm not mistaken, there was a fee attached to
Partial releases.
Yes, do you know what it is?
It's $250.
That's what the city charges currently because there's administrative processes and a legal process whenever someone submits a request for a partial release. So there's cost to the city every time someone wants one of those.
So I guess where do we go from here is where I'm.
I think we would be looking perhaps at a February timeframe to come back with a new draft ordinance to kick off the new streamlined process for the city. Obviously, there'll be some council policy decisions that have to be made, but we have a draft ordinance that we can tweak in that regard.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may, what staff's intention is to bring you a draft ordinance for consideration and ultimately to move forward with adoption. Now, if it is obviously an ordinance takes 2 readings to adopt, but if the board wishes to say, the first meeting in February, let's have it as a discussion item and then move, if the board feels comfortable, the second meeting you can do first reading, and then your meeting in March you can do the second and final reading if you would like to discuss it more, as you're still missing 2 members of the council that may want to provide some additional insight before we just bring it right to a council for first reading. So I probably think as it is such an important element to what we do, that the most optimal pathway forward would probably be bring it forward for another discussion like this with the balance of the board, and then get some additional opportunities to have conversations with elected officials on some other elements that you may have questions about, and then bring it for second and final reading, or first reading at the end of February and second and final reading in March.
Okay, and then could we get a copy of that PowerPoint with those
Absolutely.
options on that?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I like that idea, since there's so much placed upon us as elected officials. I want to see I know we know about the CRA's reclaim program that they offer. If we have, and I don't know if, maybe I might be going too far when I say this, but I know we have a lot of people that come up to us throughout our regular day, and if we know of people in our district that have challenges with coming into compliance, if there's a way, and I guess I'm looking for input from the members and also administration, that we as an elected body can say, hey, this is letter from Councilperson Broderick McCoy. Here's a list of resources that could assist you in doing this, simultaneously, as to try to help them get to where they should be without it just being, you got a code enforcement violation, figure out how to deal with it. Because, regrettably, some of these folks don't know that there are some resources that may be available to them. So I want to know if there is, we can create a reference sheet of some available resources, such as the SHIP program for the county and some of those other things that are around. Because that is, I guess, a true essence of us representing it, connecting them to resources that may be available.
I know Anita Jenkins is usually pretty good. She has a good list of resources, so maybe we can work
Yeah.
with her and,
We can certainly, in tandem, as we present different iterations of this to the board, work with our partners at the CRA to create that list of available resources. So as we look to change the ordinance, that we also provide the necessary resources. Because at the end of the day, it's about compliance, and that's why we changed the name from enforcement to compliance. And so we can assist on looking at community-based resources throughout the city and maybe even in the county at large.
all right. Any other questions or comments from the board? That's 141. I know we have about 3 more sections to go through. And we're supposed to be finishing at 3. It doesn't look like we'll be finished at 3 unless we're going to work a little through. No, it's not
I don't think
working.
Walter turned John.
One more talking point regarding what I was just talking about? Oh. He saved you.
Thank you all, and I want to thank Ms. Godot and Ms. Bostic. They do a really great job with the program, and Ms. Godot is really an excellent resource for everybody on this. For the record, Jeff Gagnon, Acting Director of Development Services. One of the points that I just wanted to make was I think the PowerPoint really explained the process as far as the current process versus the proposed process. But one of the biggest impacts that we think the new process will have may pertain to vacant lots, because right now, because of the timing of multiple code hearings, you could have a vacant lot that's cited, and we get a call about the lot, and it's taking weeks, if not months, in order to go through the full process. So if you can imagine, if the property owner does mow or does take care of trash prior to the second hearing, it resets the clock. So from a timing component, if you could think there's 12 months in the year, you have a co-compliance hearing once a month, you're only maintaining a parcel 6 times during the year. So it's almost incentivizing absentee property owners to not take care of their property to the level that I think we're all expecting in the community. So I think that was one of the talking points that will be a true tangible impact for the neighborhood that the new ordinance could help to effectuate. So thank you.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, just to be clear, with the direction from the board is to bring this to you in February as a discussion and deliberation item in a draft format with the ordinance and the PowerPoint to get the balance of the board to opine on this, and then look to bring you, if the board wishes to move forward, at your second meeting in February, the first reading of the ordinance, and then second and final reading in March.
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody's good with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Madam Chair, for the purposes of understanding that we have a limited time together, we would like to at least get through the next 2 items, and then the final 2, derelict vessels, policies and procedures, and update on sober homes. If the board would indulge staff, I'd like to add those onto your meeting here in January, your January 21st meeting, as a discussion and deliberation items, because there are 2 items here that I think the balance of the board has had questions with me in the past, and I think it's important for them to have the presentation. So,
Well, that comes down to wanting to be there late at night, later, I'm sure, because so that will be a little added discussion time. So as long as everybody's good with that, either today or on the 21st.
and Madam Chair, if I may, we do have a light agenda on the 21st as it stands right now. Yes, ma'am.
So you're going to add those items to that agenda?
If that's what you all
the-
want to do,
the
or
two-
finish them out today.
Finish them out.
Which one?
The last
Yeah.
2, the legal C, 2C,
We have
and then D.
2C.
I mean, the 3 items, actually. It'd be update on derelict
looking at the agenda?
vessels,
Look at the agenda.
policies and
No, the
procedures, update on sober homes legislation, and the convenience stores.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the table of contents, but Can you repeat back what you're
2C.
proposing? 2C?
It would be 5, 6, and 7. So it would be item update on derelict vessels, policies, and procedures. It would be update on sober homes legislation, and then the last one, convenience stores.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm so lost.
Because he's went,
He-
go
he's-
to the agenda.
5, 6,
Look
and
at the
7
agenda.
is not
Yeah,
on
he's
my-
talking about the tabs now.
Oh,
Okay.
Just stay with the agenda, we're at the agenda now. Just stay with the agenda.
Okay, so the items on the agenda, we've talked about the process for property compliance. The items we would like to get through today is nuisance abatement and chronic nuisance process, compliance-related initiatives by the police department. As far as item C, 2C, which would be update on derelict vessels, policies, and procedures, update on sober homes legislation, and item D, convenience stores.
You're saying for the 21st.
I would like to add to the 21st unless it's the board's pleasure to continue on.
Do you have a big agenda for the 21st?
As
No,
it
just
stands
one
right
of
now, we do not have a large agenda, and we will, if for any reason, if there's additional items, we will make sure we manage it accordingly.
All right, what do you all want to do?
that's what I would agree.
You all have, if one member leaves, you'll be good, right? We'll be good?
If,
We don't need a quorum.
Yeah, we won't need a quorum, 'cause it's a
Okay.
workship.
All right.
You plan on leaving?
I had somewhere to go at 4, but, I'll hang with you all for a little bit.
We should be able to get through by 4.
No, because we haven't even had anything to eat.
Oh.
I mean, I know you're not, you forgot about that? So, I mean, we can move on. I mean, the thing is, I don't want it, I would prefer to go through today, but, because I know during the weeknights, everybody's ready to go, and, I mean, do you want to do a 15-minute quick break?
Yeah.
Now, you all say 15 minutes, and it turns into 30.
Well, can we grab our stuff first then and then?
Well, we always do, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
15 minutes.
I would much rather get it done today because, it'll be another issue
Yeah,
that comes
and-
up, and then, you know how things add to
I
the
agree.
agenda, and so,
I agree.
Actually,
I
you-
just
hey.
know that if I have to leave, you'll know why.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I seen the planning and zoning board stated after 10 o'clock on Thursday.
I've
I
been there
was-
till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm
I-
used to it.
I
I'm good.
was surprised.
But I did have somewhere to go at 4.
Okay, well, I tell you what, if we do this, once we get to 4, whatever we haven't done, we'll put it on the agenda.
No, I didn't say I have to be somewhere at 4. I gotta go
Oh.
home and go. But just, don't worry about me, because you don't have to have the 3, so you all can essentially continue,
I got it.
okay? All right, so what time is 1:48? It's 1:48 right now, so, maybe what, 2:10, 2:15? I know it's a little longer than 15 minutes, but
2:05.
if we want to, huh?
2:05.
2:05? Okay. We'll take a quick,
That's 20 minutes?
it's gonna take you,
Okay, all right.
it's gonna take you all more than that, I know, but we'll say 2:05. All right, so 2:05, we'll come back, and the microphones and everything is still on, right? Okay.